Hey guys, what's up? It's Debbie, and I am back with more Phil Spector. We are still on Dr. Pena's testimony. I think I said yesterday we were done. We're not done. Now, don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. Hey, Jelly Bean. Hey, Judy. Good morning. He has a lot more testimony. I don't know what I was thinking. A lot. You okay, Bill? Bill, are you all right? Oh, goodness. I will be right back. Okay, sorry about that. She got her foot caught with one of those, I think they're called turbo scratchers for the cat. It's it's got a thing to scratch in the center and has a little ball. Oh, thank you. It's a dress. It's a dress. Well, you can't see the whole thing. Well, you still can't see the whole thing, but it's a dress. Thank you. So poor thing. She got her foot caught kind of in the little track with the ball, and she just bambied because she couldn't get her foot out, and the other feet just went out, and then she peed because she was on her way to the door and I guess she couldn't hold it and she couldn't get back up, and poor baby. Thank you, Jilly. But Travis took her outside. She's okay. She got up on her own. She didn't need help to get up. She's getting old. Poor thing. My baby's getting old. But she's okay. She wanted me to go back to bed with her this morning and cuddle. I did it for as long as I could, and then I started falling back to sleep. I was Phil, I gotta get up, sweetheart. I have to get up. So that is one of the things I was going to tell y'all this morning, but I was going to tell you I do not have pink eye, but they're not red anymore. We used to call it a facial because she likes to lick my face everywhere. And I'm allergic to dogs, guys. So my eyes were blood red a while ago. Usually it stays that way for a while, but it went away. Okay, so we have a new trial to start this morning. So I've got 2 videos pulled up and ready to go. Still Dr. Pena. One is 22 minutes long and the other one's an hour. So I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them. But we're going to give it a shot. What in the heck?
To move to a subject that deals with your review of medical records concerning Ms. Clarkson's prescription and so forth. As part of the package of materials that you recently, part of it is some pharmacy records or from Long's drugs and received her and you got a printout or a record of all of that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And included in there were a number of these medications that we previously have been talking about, including the medication that we talked about yesterday, dealing with the bleeding problem or that causes bleeding. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so we'll get to lungs records in a minute, but basically as part of a medical investigation as to cause of death and circumstances surrounding death, you try to inventory and understand what medications the person may have been on at the time of their death or close in time to their death. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you do, and you've talked about toxicology results. Mr. Jackson asked you a number of questions about those.
You know what else causes bleeding? A gunshot wound to the head.
That might be relevant to your inquiry. Is that correct?
Yes.
How is that done? In other words, who's in charge of that? You, one of your staff, one of the investigators?
In this case, it's investigator Barbara Nelson, that's the inventory on her shoulder.
Okay, and would it be true, Dr. Pena, that there's a document and a record that's kept of the inventory that's done?
Yes.
And it's a standard medical or coroner's office record that's kept in the ordinary course of business?
Yes.
And it's a one-page inventory, is that correct?
Yes.
And could we have marked next in order an inventory page?
Triple J.
Triple J. Showing mark Triple J that's on the record on the screen now, Dr. Pena. Could you look at this and tell me what it is?
That's a Form 3A. It's medical evidence that's collected at a death scene in this case. And it are medications a person may be taking, the number that are issued, the number that remain, where it may have been filled, who the doctor is that prescribed it, if known, if necessary. And basically that's it. And which could be other medications found that were maybe loosely in her purse, which was the case here. And that's it.
Okay, so this is just basically an inventory record associated with the decedent scene of her death, correct?
Yes.
And so it goes through, it doesn't necessarily, it's essentially what was found.
Yes.
Okay, and was a similar type document created at her apartment or place that she lived?
I know that.
Okay, and does your place where they were residing to look for medications and things of that nature?
Normally not. In a case like this, normally not.
Okay, but in the event you and then the toxicology discussions that or results that you do, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so for example, here there's a over-the-counter medications and so forth. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you recall having discussions about medications and so forth with members of the district attorney's office concerning this case?
Well, that would be with Mr. Doug Sortino and I believe with Mr. Jackson, but I can't recall this.
In one of the meetings that you felt that all she was taking was over-the-counter medications as far as what was in her purse?
Yes.
Okay, now look at the fourth one down, if we could have that highlighted, or actually enlarge a little bit. In fact, that's what you told me, DAs, is that as far as what was on her possession, you felt that it was over-the-counter type medications. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right, and is this an over-the-counter medication?
I don't know, to be honest with you on that one.
What is HYDROCO?
That would be hydrocodone. That's Vicodin. I think you need a prescription for that. That's pretty strong. Analgesic, they call it, or pain reliever.
Okay, and this is something, acetaminophen.
I'm sorry,
it's a combination?
acetaminophen. That's right.
Acetaminophen, okay.
Or Tylenol.
And that's a combination one. And in your work that you did,
Vicodin, hydrocodone, that's an opioid. That's a controlled substance. That's a prescription painkiller. You would think an ME would know that. What the heck?
And I don't believe we tested for acetaminophen. I can't recall offhand.
okay. But in any event, that would be consistent with this record here. Is that correct? The
Yeah.
Vicodin?
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. And you talked at length about and were questioned about whether it's a therapeutic dosage and so forth by Mr. Jackson. You felt that the level was, and what was tested as far as the Vicodin was concerned?
Oh, the Vicodin was tested.
Okay, in other words, what fluid was tested? Was it a blood test or urine or something else?
It was blood.
Okay, and was there a test of the bile that was also done, the toxicology bile?
Yes.
Okay, before we give you the result, or you talk about that result, can you tell the jury what the difference is when you test the blood versus the bile? In other words, what is bile? What's it used for as far as toxicology work?
Well, basically, the blood is the first part where you take a medication orally. It's going to get absorbed through your stomach, eventually get into your bloodstream. Then we get the sample and test it, and that's the blood that we're looking at, the result, of course, which is the blood sample. In the process of all that, though, that medication is going elsewhere. It's going, of course, through the liver. Actually, it goes through the liver first. In this case, if it is ingested orally, and as part of that process, not only goes into the liver tissue to get what's called metabolized or broken down, but it gets stored also in what's called the bile sac, which is underneath the liver. That's, the gallbladder, where it's stored. The gallbladder makes components or chemical elements called bile, which help digest our fats, etc. And that's like a little punching bag, it looks like, again, underneath the liver. And that's where it's stored. So I took that out and saved all fluids from basically her whole body. And all this tells us is that if it's present in the bile, that she's using it and it's stored there. And that's all I can tell you.
Okay, is there does the testing of the bile, well, let me rephrase it and ask it in this way. When you test the bile, you're able to look at sort of longer term usage of drug. It doesn't give you a current level that's in the body at the time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so that would tell us something different than the level that's in the body as far as over time or chronic use of the drug. Is that true?
That's true.
And you knew from the records that from the medical records, one of the ones that we talked about before, that she was on this drug for quite some time. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was this a prescription use or was it a non-prescription use, or do you know one way or the other?
I don't know.
Okay, and the only way...
Okay, I just had to Google that because I thought he was wrong, and he is wrong. The gallbladder does not produce bile. Your liver produces bile. And I was pretty sure that I was right, but I just wanted to double check that. Because you need bile to digest your food. So if you get your gallbladder removed and it produces bile, you can't digest your food. So yeah, he's wrong.
way you would know is you'd have to look at the prescriptions. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But you knew from the testing of the bile levels in the that was done by your toxicology people that there was some test results that were significant. Is that correct? Okay. And do you have?
Let me find them here. Okay.
All right. And this is the same record or documents that you were talking about when you talked about the 0.14 blood alcohol, 0.12 blood alcohol level?
Yes.
Okay. And it talked about the hydrocodone level that you mentioned in your direct examination. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you basically testified that the hydrocodone level, which is kind of an opiate derivative, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
It's the class of drugs it is. Is that true?
Yes.
And you said it was a 0.07 milligrams per milliliter. Is that correct?
Actually, I'm sorry. It's okay. It's micrograms, UG/ml.
Okay. And that's basically how the level is quantified in the blood. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, was the bile reading, was it higher or lower than that?
It's higher.
Okay, and is it, was it more than twice as high?
It would be about 4 times higher.
0.07, and in the bile it was 2.7. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, so significantly higher, and that would give you a more definitive long term as to what the levels were when they were basically at their peak or whatever. In other words, she could never have been lower than that at any particular time.
That's a difficult one for me to interpret, to be honest with you. This is basically just telling you a distribution, and I can't backtrack from the bile and quantitate at any point in time what levels may or may not have been in this person. It's beyond my expertise.
Okay. All right, and then with reference to the toxicology results, and we'll since we're on this subject before, that's actually pretty close. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you made some statements that the 0.12 level is more accurate than the 0.14 level. To the extent that that's significantly different, what is the basis of your knowledge to give that opinion that the 0.12 is more accurate?
Well, basically, yes, it's the water soluble. Alcohol is water soluble, so it'll pass through the blood-brain barrier as it would anywhere else in our body. But the femoral is a little more accurate because it's out in the periphery. It's been distributed already, and it's circulated basically through the body, and that's why I say it's probably a little more accurate.
Do you have for that? In other words, is there a study that you're talking that you relied upon?
There's a district, BASSELT, is one of the authorities on drug toxins and drugs that we rely on in our office. And they talk about, this is after death, so it'll help you out, about redistribution ratios between heart and other areas of the body. It gives you ratio sometimes. And in this case, it'll go heart to femoral. It has a ratio like 2 to 1, 3 to 1, et cetera, or fractions of that, 2.5 to 1. So you get a little bit of understanding that the heart will be a little higher than it would be in the femoral. So you can kind of evaluate that.
Okay, so you're getting it from this book by Randall Basalt, essentially. Is that correct? That's his first name?
I'm sorry, that's correct.
Okay, and he's a toxicologist that is published on that subject, is your testimony?
Yes.
Okay, and but basically alcohol is absorbed through the stomach and it goes into the bloodstream as it's absorbed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you're saying that once it gets into the bloodstream, depending upon where you get it, it's either higher or lower, depending upon the location where you draw the blood out.
In general, yes.
Okay, so and you're okay. Very good, doctor. Now, following up on the toxicology testing that you did, getting back to the medications and various drugs that were collected from Lana Clarkson, you were also given recently, because we provided those to the people and they gave them to you in this box that you have at your office, you're actually given prescription ordering records. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those are very detailed. Is that true, doctor?
Yes, they are.
And did you carefully go through them?
I did.
Okay, and when did you do that?
About maybe a couple months ago to a month ago, prior to my testimony today.
Soon after you received them, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you make any attempt to get those records back in 2003 at or near the time that you rendered your opinions in this particular case?
No.
Did you have a reason for that?
Yes.
Okay. Did you feel that they were irrelevant?
No.
Okay. If we could have Mark next in order, a document called Long's Drugs.
Triple K.
Thank you.
StreamYard, you've been doing so good. I was starting to actually believe that you could do this. And then you muted me again.
Your testimony that you gave in this court today regarding this case.
Yes, I did.
And did you make any notes as to your review of other documents that you were recently given?
No.
Okay. And you had a recent problem or a remote problem with substances such as alcohol. You came to those opinions originally, had you had the benefit of this prescription drug history?
No.
Okay. And with reference to this particular history, would you consider and take account of sort of the overall drugs that are taken by a person, prescription or otherwise, and the amounts that they take over a period of time?
Yes.
Okay, and would the same be true of alcohol? In other words, if somebody were having a drink of alcohol for the first time and they're versus somebody that maybe drank more regularly, would the alcohol affect them a little differently?
Yes.
Okay, and would the same be true of drugs like Vicodin?
Yes.
Okay, and what is it about the regular use of alcohol or drugs that makes a difference as far as its effect on persons?
It's called tolerance, and basically, like Mr. Ford is saying, tried alcohol for the first time, you generally want to start with a small glass or small sample, and otherwise you can get quite ill, obviously, if you drink too much for the first time. But after time, if you become a regular drinker, let's say, and have maybe a drink once a week, and then you move to twice a week, your body starts to adjust to it. Because you know the euphoric feeling or calmness that you might get from it, or you might get irritated from it too. It can work the opposite. It's hard to tell. Everybody's different. Bottom line is your body gets used to it. It's like taking a shower. You jump in the shower and you know how you get used to it. Someone might get in there with you and say, hey, this is too cold for me, but you've adjusted to it. The same concept applies to the medications or drug use. And that's called tolerance.
Okay, and let me ask you, with reference to alcohol and Ms. Clarkson, did you know?
That was a weird analogy for tolerance. Taking a shower with somebody else. That was weird.
Or learn anything from any of the records, setting aside for the moment any of the recent records that you reviewed, what her regular use of alcohol was?
She defined herself as a social drinker.
Okay, so that's what you accepted as correct, isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay, let me ask you a hypothetical question, Dr. Pena, with reference to that last subject, and that has to do with social drinking. If a person could consume, let's say, 14, let's just pick that number, 14 shots of tequila, in other words, in one sitting or event or so forth, would that be, in your view, a social drinker?
Well, you know what? It's hard for me to judge because some people can do that, and I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Okay. So if somebody had the ability to consume that much, would that be within the realm of social drinking to you? And let's say in an evening or at a particular event.
Objection. It's beyond the witness's ability to answer that.
Can you answer that question? Do you
No,
have
I
the
cannot.
expertise? The objection is sustained.
When you looked at Ms. Clarkson's medical file, you made a mention that there were some doctors that tried to get her off certain medications. Did any doctors try to get her off the Vicodin medication?
I don't recall Vicodin.
Okay, and you testified that basically, as far as the level that was in Miss Clarkson at the time that the blood was taken, was within the therapeutic range. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does that mean that you are certain that she was taking it for therapeutic reasons?
That I don't know.
Okay, and would one way that you would know is whether or not she was taking it in a prescribed manner?
That's correct.
Okay, and sometimes with reference to patients, sometimes they get prescriptions and they basically take prescriptions that are not according to the label. In other words, they may get a prescription for something, but they take more than they're prescribed.
Objection, this calls for speculation, it's beyond the expertise.
Do you have the expertise to answer the question?
No.
The objection is sustained.
Doctor, when you looked at the medication records, which you received recently, did you look at the prescription records for Ms. Clarkson within the last year of her life? In other words, during the preceding months, let's say up to a year before her demise.
Yes.
Okay, and did you see any prescriptions for Vicodin hydrocodone?
Let me just confirm that.
And you're looking at Exhibit KKK, I take it.
I'm sorry, yes, I'm looking at this exhibit KKK. And here's one here in March 2002 through April 2002. That's a prescription for the hydrocodone or Vicodin with the Tylenol. And there's another one, there's a number of them to go all the way from March of 2002, all the way to August of 2002, all the same. Let me continue a little bit. If you back up in time a little bit, go to February, let's go to January now of 2002. And it seems to stop at August of 2002. That's again, just the Vicodin for the jurors, I'm sorry. And that's all I see for that.
Okay. The last one being in August, is that correct? And basically, let's just pick out a time period, but let's just look for April. Is that, you're looking at individual prescriptions, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so for April of 2002, basically there's a record for 50 tablets on the 3rd of April, 50 more tablets on the 10th, another 50 tablets on the 18th, and that basically, as far as Vicodin, that covers April, is that correct?
I'm sorry, the last part of your question?
Those are all part of the prescription records, that 50 tablets on the 3rd of April, another 50 on the 10th. These are all separate prescriptions. That the first one was 50, the second one was 50. There was another 50 on the 18th prescribed, and then actually on the 30th, another 50. So that's all documented in the Long's records for April. Is that correct?
Yes.
And during that very same month, she's given a prescription for Paxil. Is that correct?
Let me find Paxil.
Well, we're going to go ahead and take our afternoon recess. Ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind the admonition. We'll see you at 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you. All right, the jurors and alternates are now present. You may resume.
Good morning, Dr. Pena. We were talking about your review of some medication records from Longs that you were provided by the District Attorney's Office, and then I gave you the records that they've been marked as an exhibit KKK, and we were talking about that before we broke. Did you get a chance to look at those a little bit more in detail?
Yes.
Okay, let me ask you some general questions, sort of foundational questions about records that an expert like you might review on issues concerning manner of death. And just before I ask you the final questions regarding that exhibit, when you testified on direct, you talked about you had to consider for the issue of manner of death outside information in order to make a determination in this particular case. Is that true?
Yes.
And in your opinion page that we had up on the screen, that's one of the exhibits here, you talked about reports and different things of that nature. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then with reference to, for example, this last exhibit, Exhibit KKK, prescription records, is that the type of information that an expert like you would reasonably rely upon to consider and review before rendering an opinion on manner of death?
Objection on its face to time.
Could you just be more specific?
Would medication records of an individual that contained a record of their recently used medications be the type of records that you would review and consider when you want to come to an opinion as to manner of death?
It would be if it's important to the cause of death. For example, if I have a high drug level, I'd certainly look into her background on prescription use, like you said, and see the pattern perhaps.
Okay, so what I think you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you would want to review the records, and because there might be something important in there, but you'd want to at least review and consider them and then make a determination as to what's important, what's not important. Is that correct?
Yes.
And with reference to, let's say, medical records, you would look at recent medical records and remote medical records and basically do the same thing. Review them, consider them, and then give them a value or a weight depending upon what circumstances are involved in that particular case. Is that true?
Objection on its compound as opposed to recent versus remote.
Could you just be a little more, be more specific, and then it'll take the problem away?
In reviewing records, would you find it valuable to you to review all medical records that were available to you regarding a decedent, depending upon a particular case?
I rely mainly on the most recent records that pertain to that individual and that terminal event, if necessary.
Okay. Ultimately, you rely on certain things and you don't rely on other things, but before you do that, consider basically more ultimately rely upon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's separate what you ultimately rely upon, because you don't know that until you actually review and consider it, correct? As far as records are concerned, true? And the same would be true of police reports or other circumstances involved in an investigation. Is that also correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you would consider all the medical records, both new and old, and then make a determination as to what you might feel comfortable in relying upon. True?
Correct. And that's, again, based on case by case, just for your information.
Okay. Yeah, different cases might call for more records or less records being considered.
That's correct.
Is that true? And it really depends on the issues involved in any particular case. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So in your conclusion page of your autopsy report, you talk about suicidal ideations. Is that, you remember making a statement regarding that?
Yes.
Could you tell the jury what that exact statement was? In other words, that you made in your final conclusion in your autopsy report that you published back in September of 2003.
There was no history of suicidal ideation.
Okay, and so on the issue of manner of death, separating the medical cause findings and so forth, but the issue of manner of death, did you consider the issue of suicide in any way? In other words, did you look at that issue?
Yes.
Okay. And in order to look at that issue, you had to consider the state of mind of the decedent. Is that correct?
That's difficult to do from an autopsy.
I understand it's difficult. Right.
I'm not quite sure I get the question. I'll try to actually, like reviewing medical records perhaps.
Let me, it's sort of a global or general question. In order to understand the state of mind of an individual, you have to look at information that will give you some idea as to what their state of mind was. Is that true?
Yes.
Maybe of their conduct.
I'm sorry.
Somebody with something like that.
Correct.
Okay. Like in your report, you make the statement that there was no evidence of suicidal ideations. And what that is, an ideation is some statement, whether expressed or implied, that the person may not want to carry on with their life. Is that correct?
Yes.
It could be 100% direct. I want to die would be an example of one. Is that correct?
Well, actually, you got to go a little beyond that. It's a very explicit expression. So, for example, I want to die, but here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to put a gun to my head. I want to die, and I'm really depressed and down, but I have all these medications I've stockpiled for 6 months, and I'm going to take them all at one time. And I'll see you later. I'm going to check it all and go. It's very explicit and expressive, or it could be written, or it could be verbalized to a friend or family or whoever.
Okay.
That's ideation.
Okay, so you're saying that a suicidal ideation is not only the expression that somebody either expressed or implied wants to die, but that they want to do it, they want to kill themselves in a particular manner. Is that correct?
Yes, that's been my experience. It's a little more expressive than just saying, I want to die. You have to put it in the right context.
Okay.
The way it's expressed, or perhaps like you said, the way it's written, it has to be correctly interpreted in the context that it's stated.
Okay, so the only thing you would want to see is something that's expressed that would have both of those components. I want to die and I want to do it a particular way, whether it's a gun, a car, whatever the situation.
But in the context, I like to see that.
Okay, you want to see it in the context. So that's what you define suicidal ideations as. Is that correct?
That's my opinion. That's correct.
And as a forensic pathologist over the years, have you considered, let's say, letters, emails, things of that nature that a person might write to get an idea of what their state of mind was?
Yes.
Now, in forensic pathology, when you're dealing with the issue of suicide, a note where this type of expression is made is only found in about 25 or so percent of the cases. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so in your report, you make a statement, suicidal ideation.
That's correct.
Okay, so if it was somewhere else, or then you.
At that time, that's correct.
Okay, later on, would you want to consider it?
Absolutely.
Okay, and do forensic pathologists, do they differ at all in what they want to consider as to what's a suicide note or what's a suicidal ideation?
Objection to false suspected.
If he's aware, are you aware?
I'm sorry, can't get the paper. I don't have the paper with me, and I'm going to decline on it, Your Honor.
Disagreement in your field as to what a suicidal ideation is. In other words, what the definition of it is and what should be considered or not considered.
There would be. That's why we have the help of forensic psychiatrists who come and teach us, but they help us with our cases that we're having difficulty with, and they'll go through all these factors.
So I noticed you guys weren't green anymore. So I was trying to give you guys memberships again. And it gave people memberships that weren't even in the chat. And it crashed StreamYard. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
subpoena those records or obtain those records by other proper means, then we can reasonably rely that they're accurate as far as what the records show. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And in your testimony that you gave the other day regarding the decedent, you mentioned that she was on Paxil and some of these other medications, but she was on them for some other use than what might be termed as antidepressant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Trying to get her off of those because of other medications that she was supposed to be not on or trying to be taken off of. Did I understand that correctly?
No, they weren't trying to get her off the Paxil. They tried the Elavil first, as I discussed with you on Tuesday. I'm talking to the jurors, sorry. Then they tried the Elavil first, the neurologist. He switched her to Paxil for certain reasons and continued that on well into August of 2002. She still had the headaches. I don't know about her symptoms too well because the charting was difficult to read sometimes. It seemed to be working. They seemed to be reoccurring, but she was going on. She was still working, still doing her social interactions. So she was doing well, but again, I don't know her in that context, but I'm extracting again from the records. And I'm sorry I drifted away from your question.
All right, I kind of got lost in my question too with your answer, but I'll try to regroup and ask you this, Doctor. You would agree that Elavil and Paxil are atypically, in other words, usually antidepressant type medications. Is that true?
Overruled. He may answer that.
They generally are used for depression. However, both of those drugs can be used for other conditions, such as obsessive compulsive disorder, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder. There's a premenstrual syndrome type disorder. I'll just keep it very broad that women have that they use actually Paxil for, have had a good success with that. So there's a number of reasons people can be using these drugs and do quite well. And headaches they found in the mid-90s when they started using these combinations, they were very successful with that. And that's how this came about.
Okay. How do you know what this drug is used for and so forth? Did you just know that generally before this case, or did you do some research concerning it?
I did some research and just from general medical knowledge, because of some work that I do on the side, that I can't keep up with the literature. And I get a PDR, physician's desk reference every year. I'm 2007 up to date for this year, which covers all these medications. And you can look them up and it'll give you a list of indications. And in other words, when to use them, what for, how to give the dosage, etc. So it's very interesting and very helpful for my profession.
Okay, and there's certain approved uses for these drugs. Is that correct? Called FDA usage guidelines?
Yes.
Okay, and basically doctors are required to give them only for those approved uses. Is that true? And that's what you're talking about, correct?
In general, yes.
What do you mean in general?
Well, for instance, Paxil and the PDR will not list for headaches. However, it's accepted practice by the FDA for approval for headaches, as neurologists will use this drug, and also Elavil.
Okay, so let's go through some of the lists of things that you were talking about, obsessive compulsive disorder, things like that. Basically, we're not concerned with any of that as to Ms. Clarkson. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. PMS, not anywhere on the records or?
I'd hold on that. I'm not sure on that. I don't know who her OBGYN doctor is, but she had bad premenstrual issues. I know that from her records, but I can't speak for her. So anyway. But
why are we going through her entire list of medications? She was shot. We are trying to decide if it was a homicide. You've already declared it was a homicide. Why are we going through her entire list of medications? It doesn't make any sense. I get he's trying to prove that she could have done this to herself, but I don't see a need to go through her whole entire medicine list and her history. It's waste of time.
Her OBGYN wasn't prescribing the Paxil and Elavil, so you would presume that it's not being prescribed by a non-OBGYN for for that purpose, would you?
That's correct.
Okay, so we can exclude that, can we not, from Ms.
Yes.
Clarkson? And it's not approved in the PDR for headaches at all, is that true? You
It's
just
not-
said that.
It's not listed there as one of the.
And the FDA doesn't allow doctors, or at least permit doctors to prescribe it for that reason. Isn't that also true?
Oh,
Yeah, Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
The bottom line is, he's testified somewhat for misinterpretation of the records. If he has an understanding of the medication, I believe it is marginally relevant, and I will allow him to testify to it if he is otherwise qualified to do so.
But why?
That's my ruling.
That's
You may answer.
Does the FDA approve Paxil and Elavil, or either one, for headaches?
I do not know that.
Okay. Now, let's get back to the records, Doctor. The Long's drugstore records, we were talking about basically Vicodin, and there's a hydrocodone is the generic name for it, basically. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the way.
The only way that would be relevant is if she was having a migraine at the time, because I've had migraines where I wanted to unalive myself. Trust me. You don't want a migraine. Those are the most debilitating health conditions of any. You do not want a migraine. But, I mean, I've literally banged my head against the floor. And my dad's been like, what are you doing? It hurt so bad. Is banging your head on the floor going to make it better? No. Then why are you doing it? I don't know. Take me to the ER, Dad. Take me to the ER. No, they're not going to do anything. I don't care. Take me to the ER. They're literally that bad that you don't know what to do. You're just like, I got to do something and I don't know what to do.
It's listed in the records. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay, and so I want to talk about an approximate 1 month period of time. And just tell me the records you considered reflect or not. In other words, I want to make sure I'm reading the records correctly. And that is on, let's just start with March 2602. One doctor, 50 tablets of Vicodin, 650 milligrams, something to that effect. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. March 29th, 02, different doctor, Paxil, 30 tablets, 10 milligrams.
Correct.
Now, do you know what whether she was prescribed two, to take two at a time or one at a time or anything such as that?
I know the Paxil was prescribed initially to use 10 milligrams. She had some side effects, and he would explain to her to go ahead and break the tablet in half and just take 5 milligrams of the Paxil because of the side effects.
Okay, April 3rd, the same year, 2002, 650 milligram tablets of Vicodin, correct?
Yes.
April 10th, another 650 milligrams of Vicodin.
Yes. Hold on 1 second. There's a 10-650 milligrams listed at the top. You have two medications, hydrocodone, which is the Vicodin. It says with, very simple, with Tylenol. I'm not quite sure which is the 10 and which is the 650. It's split.
Okay, 50 tablets though, is that correct?
50 tablets, that's correct.
April 18th, another 50 tablets of Vicodin, is that correct? Same dosages?
Vicodin with the Tylenol.
Okay, same thing. And April 30th, another 50 tablets of the same.
How do you not know that the 650 is Tylenol and the 10 is the Vicodin? Oh my God. Nancy, I'm with you. Is this guy a doctor or not? What medical school did you go to, dude?
Medication, is that correct?
Yes.
And during that period, another doctor was prescribing the Paxil medication. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And then regarding the medication that we talked about yesterday, that's, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's ACYCLOVIR.
Well, that's acyclovir.
Acyclovir. Thank you, doctor. That's the medication that causes bleeding that we discussed yesterday. Is that correct?
Well, it can increase fragility. I'm sorry, it could increase someone to bruise. Very simple.
Okay, and are there any pharmacy records that show that she's being prescribed that during the last year of her life?
I believe so, yes.
And it's prescribed by a different doctor, is that correct?
Let me check here.
Than the other two, than the Vicodin and the Paxil, is that true?
By another doctor.
Different doctor.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm not going to get into any of the details of that, but it's prescribed regularly. You see that repeatedly throughout the records of the last year of her life. And I don't want to go through each one and say on this date, but do you see that trend in there for this medication regarding the acyclovir?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be, just to put this in perspective, that would be a regular medication. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, and in these particular records, when it comes to Paxil and Elavil, has there ever been any, to your knowledge, information that the cessation of those drugs might cause a problem to the mental state of an individual?
No.
With reference to these particular records, do you quarrel with the accuracy of any of these records, of any of these pharmacy records in the Long's exhibit that you have before you?
I'm sorry, what was that word? Do I?
The accuracy of them. In other words, that there's some reason that they may not be correct.
No, I don't.
Now, what was the last time that Ms. Clarkson was prescribed the Vicodin medications by the doctor that was prescribing her that?
That, let's see, let me look here. Well, it'd probably go into, obviously, February of 2003 or perhaps before that, but I don't see it on here, but it's probably listed. I'd have to look. Hold on one second,
Okay.
which means 30. I'm sorry, and I don't see it here on that.
The records that you have before you show the last prescription for Vicodin to be August of '02. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but the pharmacy records actually cover through 2003. In other words, they go right up to the later dates. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so absent her going to, and basically these pharmacy records for Ms. Clarkson start back in the, let's see, it goes all the way back to the, somewhere in the 1997, 98,
Yes.
and they go all the way through 2003. In other words, this appears to be where she typically would get her prescriptions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so the last prescription for Vicodin that was prescribed by a doctor was in August. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and did you, in all the medical records that you reviewed, did you see any doctors or medical records where there was any notation where she was being prescribed Vicodin after August of 2002?
I recall that.
And doctors usually obtain what they give a patient for a particular presenting problem.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
In other words, when a doctor sees a patient, do they usually put some notation? In fact, they're required to by law, if they give a prescription, to make a notation as to what they give the patient. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay, and so the medical records, at least the recent ones that you looked at, because you were interested in the ones that were recent, don't show any prescription for Vicodin during that period of time. Let's say from August to February of 2003. Is that correct?
Well, that's a tough one because I don't know if she could have gone to a different pharmacy. This is just the Long's drugstores.
I don't want to know about Long's. I mean, Long's doesn't have it in there, and you're right. She could have gone to a different pharmacy. The question is, did you see any medical records that would be required to state that if a prescription was given, that she was prescribed that? Because you looked at those records.
I don't recall that.
Okay. And but you did you look at all of her medical records that that related to her situation in the last, let's say, year of her life that you were interested in?
Yes.
Okay, and if she was prescribed Vicodin by one of those doctors or any of those doctors that she went to, it would be in one of the medical records, regardless of what pharmacy she went to fill that prescription.
That's correct.
Okay, so. Dr. Pena, getting to the issue of manner of death, do you ever talk to people that knew the decedent?
No.
Why is that?
Well, as far as I know, in our office, we have a pretty tight policy. Our investigator coroners and, if necessary, the forensic psychiatry team from USC, if it's motive a suicide, which doesn't pertain here, would do that legwork. We're very restricted on who we can talk to, especially on a high-profile case. We have to be very careful about approaching people, especially family. I had actually the honor of talking to Ms. Clarkson on 2 different occasions to get a general idea of her daughter. And I felt that was necessary, and that's the only person that I talked to in this case.
Okay, so you did talk to the decedent's mother, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you get information from her regarding Lana Clarkson's mental state?
Yes.
Okay. And did you create a record, a work notice, a worksheet record similar to the...
Sounds about right.
Okay, do you have that in your file, or do you want me to show
Or
you?
just pop it up.
Okay.
It's triple L.
2603. You want the number? Some of the phone numbers and so forth and redacted. I've shown a copy of that to Mr. Jackson. Dr. Payne, did you recognize this?
Sorry, guys. I'm gonna leave my camera off.
I'll ask questions about it.
Thank you.
In this particular case, you made a decision to contact some mother to psychological history, if any, of Lana Clarkson. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And did you also ask her questions, very specific questions about her mental state in the recent time before her death?
Yes.
And
Oh, sorry.
I'm not asking what was said.
And I'm anticipating the next question. which
Well,
is-
at this point, we'll wait till the question is asked.
Yeah.
So
And did you document the responses that were made? I'm not asking what was said, but did you document those in your file, your official file at the coroner's office?
Yes, it's on a worksheet, Form 42.
Okay, the same type of worksheet that we've been talking about that is a business record, and you used that to record the responses here. Is that true?
Yes.
And in your testimony that you gave on direct, you talked about her mental state and the fact that she didn't have much of a psychological history, things of that nature. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that conclusion that you drew, you reviewed and considered a lot of different information before you came to that conclusion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and one part of the decedent's mother, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so this is just one of, you use the term totality of circumstances a number of times, is that correct?
Totality of evidence, all the evidence is a better way.
Okay, totality of all the evidence, basically that you considered a lot of different things, and basically you look at the totality on the issue, particularly of manner of death. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay, would this be part of that totality, this statement, just one part of many things that you considered before you made your decision?
Yes, I did.
Okay, would like to proceed, Ron.
Mr. Jackson,
I still have an objection unless the.
then we need to approach the bench.
Sure.
You may proceed.
Has to be Exhibit LB.
Yes, that can be
Thank you.
published up.
Dr. Pena, we were talking about Exhibit LLL, and I want to ask you, just first of all of this is in your handwriting and it relates to the decedent, Lana Clarkson, is that correct?
Yes.
And is it true that the date was the 6th of February of 2003?
Correct.
And this was just a few days findings that you did the autopsy, you were right in the middle of the investigation of the cause of death. And when you, and I've deleted the phone numbers out of this, I've marked those off, but you actually put those in there also, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and you actually made the phone call to Miss Clarkson?
Yes, I did.
Donna Clarkson. So you must have had a reason to contact her, is that correct?
Yes.
And the way that this works as far as information that you have is that your investigators give you data regarding not only the physical items, let's say the gun that we talked about yesterday, but also information regarding the decedent, whether they were homeless, whether they lived at a certain address, who the relatives are, things of that nature. Is that correct?
Yes.
And investigators sometimes go out and talk to next of kin, people, friends, family, et cetera, and provide you information regarding the circumstances and background of an individual sometimes. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's the type of thing that you rely on as this totality of evidence that you talked about just before we took our little brief break at the bench here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, you typically yourself don't call next of kin and to do the investigation yourself. Is that correct?
No.
Okay, now you mentioned something in your previous answer about this psychologist, the USC people, the people on staff that you can consult with if you choose to do in-depth psychological evaluations. Isn't that correct?
But those are on cases that are closed as suicides
Okay,
and they're contested.
okay, and you're saying that you never, that's never considered in a case like this where the case hasn't been closed. Is that your point?
That's correct.
Okay, and nonetheless, in a meeting, there was somebody in your office that recommended a psychological autopsy on Lana Clarkson. Is that correct? Steve Dell was his name.
He's not a physician. That's correct.
Okay, well, he was in your office and he was involved in this investigation. Is that correct?
Correct, but he's not a physician.
I didn't say he was. He was a criminalist, actually. I think we actually talked about him yesterday.
Actually, he's a tool analysis specialist. That's his title.
And we'll get back to that in a minute. Let me finish with this particular exhibit, LLL. But in any event, this is your handwriting, and it talks about Ms. Clarkson having the fractured wrist the year before, basically around Christmas time the year before. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so that was something that you wanted to know about. You wanted to get a little information about, because then that would help you go get the records, the medical records. You could get the names of the doctors and so forth. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you didn't have that before you Donna Clarkson. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that was helpful to you in sort of giving you a lead to other information that gave you a lead to other doctors that she might see, because she might have referrals and different things like that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Like, for example, the headaches, this was the lead that set you off in that direction. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And with reference to the headaches, Dr. Pena, part of the medical records that you saw regarding the prescriptions, regarding the headaches and so forth, were a number of referrals by her doctor that was prescribing that to her, to other doctors to do diagnostic testing of her. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. In other words, she went to a doctor, in this case, a neurologist who was prescribing medications, trying to figure out what her medical problem was, basically, correct?
Yes.
And sometimes when a neurologist is seeing a patient, they can't do all the testing themselves. They have to refer a patient to a specialist on various things. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like, for example, somebody to do a radiology thing, like an MRI, things of that nature, correct?
Correct.
And this particular doctor that Ms. Clarkson was going to basically referred her out for a number of tests to try to figure out what was causing these massive headaches that were, as she described them, very debilitating towards her. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so, like any good doctor, this neurologist wanted to try to find out what the medical problem was that was creating this very huge headache issue with her. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and do you recall seeing in the medical records and then eventually getting reports even recently regarding all these specialists that did this testing to see what they can find out as far as the medical reason for the headaches?
Yes.
Okay, what, do you remember like an MRI being done?
I do.
Do you remember other specialists that were consulted for CAT scans and things of that nature?
Only the MRI I remember.
Okay, do you remember other specialists, without naming them in particular, that she was referred to, and then she would come back to the neurologist for follow-up?
To rule out the possibility of a thyroid issue.
Okay. And so basically what happens is that the treating physician, in this case the neurologist, would try to get a handle on what was going on and send her out for these tests and then get the information back and then try to and give her more treatment based upon whatever information came back. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would it be true, doctor, in fact it is true, is it not, Dr. Pena, that there was never a determination, no doctor could find any medical reason for these headaches other than psychiatric? Is that correct?
That's incorrect.
Okay. What was the medical reason that was identified in the medical records regarding her headaches?
They were classified as chronic headaches, and there was two reasons. One doctor, another neurologist had seen her before this current one that prescribed the antidepressants for the headaches. And they used a term called cervical, that's with a C, sorry, genic type headaches, or tension headaches, I believe, was in his differential, this one neurologist. Tension headaches we all know about, obviously from tension or stress. The cervical with the C, genic type headaches, gets a little more complicated because they thought there might be a problem with her neck area, and like a nerve pinching from there gets entrapped in the soft tissue, might be causing stress or pain. And that's what they believe might have been leading to these headaches. So it never got really followed up well or further worked up, I should say. From what I read, it just kind of got dropped.
Okay, well, you're talking about records that you recently got in the 1990s regarding these same headache treatments. In other words, the treatment for the same headache problem, correct?
I can't remember the dates, but I don't think that one neurologist went back that late.
Okay, the recent treatment records, the one that is referred to here, the ones that where she was sent out for these MRIs and the endocrinologist and so forth, they could not find any medical reason for the headaches. Is that true or false?
That would be true.
Okay. And basically there was a history. If you look back in other medical records further on, back in the 1990s and so forth, those are the records that you're referring to as they thought it might be something to do with a neck pressure or something along those lines. Is that correct?
No, that's not right. Those were generally, I think, in the 2000 or 2001 even, because after she saw that first neurologist for those two, I just gave you tension headaches or the other one, I won't get into it again. She then went to this other neurologist she met in the late fall of 2001, who then started on the Eleville. So that's not correct.
Okay, so that she went to one neurologist and then went to another one within a short period of time?
Yes, she got worked up also. It was called the California Medical Headache Clinic. She got extensive workup there, and I'm not sure if that was the doctor I'm not sure which neurologist did that workup.
Okay, so you recently received in this box of materials some records that even went back to the 1990s. In other words, do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Okay, and basically this chronic headache thing and debilitating headache issue was something that plagued Miss Clarkson for well over a decade. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Now, would you agree that in general, when you look at the issue of manner of death, that you look at risk factors for self-inflicted wounds? In other words, if somebody is at risk, you've got to look at that issue and determine what weight to give it.
Yes.
Okay, and there you mentioned risk factors the other day and a little bit yesterday and so forth, and there are a number of them that apply to the issue of suicide. Is that correct?
Yes.
And one of those risk factors was depression, correct?
Yes, that term has to be taken correctly because it can be taken out of context. So I'm thinking more like there are different types of depression. But I'll just keep it simple for you and see. Yes.
Right. And again, I'm not trying to pin you down and say all depression, people commit suicide. That's clearly not the case. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
If I get a little depressed when the judge rules against me on a motion or a ruling, I'm not going to commit suicide, and that even though I'm depressed, correct?
Right, because we all experience that every day.
We certainly do. Both sides, Mr. Jackson too. In any event, Dr. Pena, you look at that sort of in general as a risk factor to consider and to take into consideration when the subject or issue of suicide is being looked at. Is that true?
It's one of many.
Okay, and one of many, including alcohol use and abuse. Is that correct?
That's lower on the list, actually.
Okay. One of the things you look at is whether or not somebody is under the influence of alcohol at their time of death, because that is associated with the research regarding suicide, that's something that you need to consider. Is that true?
That's incorrect.
Okay. How about drug use at time of death? In other words, you consider that as far as an overall circumstance on the issue of whether or not somebody took their own life.
With women, they're going to be more apt in our county to use drugs to OD, and that's true.
Are there studies correlating suicide to the point in time when they're alcohol or drugs?
Yes.
Okay, and they actually draw correlations. Okay, so just in general, and I don't want to say that everybody that drinks, obviously everybody that drinks is, one, not depressed, two, they're not likely to kill themselves, but you look at that just to factor that in along with all the other circumstances.
Yes.
Okay, somebody that has a serious problem with alcohol, you would look at that as a risk factor for suicide. Is that correct?
It depends what else is going on with the alcohol use.
Okay, in other words, you factor that in along with other things, and you consider that, basically. Is that true?
Correct.
And the same would be if somebody has a substance abuse problem other than alcohol, you would consider that.
Yes.
Now, in addition to considering it for suicide, basically you look at reckless behavior. That would be a risk factor or something that you would consider. If somebody engages in risky behavior.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
In other words, if somebody has engages in risky behavior, you would want to know about that, because that kind of suggests that maybe suicide is something that you'd want to consider.
That's one factor.
Okay. Now, let's get back to where we were before with the note and so forth. And essentially, what we talked about is there were some fractures of it. And one of the things that you consider is somebody that has a chronic medical condition is a risk factor for suicide. Is that correct?
In the elderly, that's generally true, actually. Not in a younger person. I haven't seen too much on that, to be honest with you.
Okay, so you would say that somebody had a chronic, somebody might or might not take their own life.
Well, he's asking if that's what he's saying. That's that.
I was paraphrasing it.
I thought he was re-asking. In any event, Go ahead, Dick. Can you answer the question? Do you have it from?
If you just ask it again, I'm sorry. And 70.
Yeah, he should be tired. How long has this poor man been on the stand? Jeez. Okay, I think we're going to stop it there because I don't know if anything has started in the courtroom yet. Well, let me check. Because it looks like this is almost done.
These are generally older people. Sorry. They have a higher risk of suicide because of chronic conditions going on.
Okay.
The younger people I won't get into, as there are other issues going on. So studies have shown that.
Okay, so is it the age or is it the chronic medical condition that's the issue?
It's hard to explain, probably a combination of both. You know, they lost their loved one, et cetera. So again, you got to factor in everything. You just can't pinpoint one topic.
Okay, what you're talking about is multiple risk factors all kind of verging together. In other words, you've got a medical condition, you have some bereavement. Is that true?
Yes.
It's loss of a loved one, and that may kind of compound the person's situation, correct?
Plus, another big thing is, like I said Tuesday, if I recall correctly, if you own a handgun, you're going to put you at pretty good risk. You have a means of a way out, or drugs for that matter.
In other words, you're at risk for suicide if you own a handgun?
You're at a higher risk in general if you have, again, like you were saying about depression, et cetera, you're at a higher risk.
Okay. Regardless of your mental state.
I don't understand what you mean by mental state.
In other words, whether somebody's and when it comes to these risk factors, is another risk factor or something that you look at to consider if somebody had maybe some financial problems that were chronic, not just, they have a little short of.
It's lower down the list, but it is listed, but it's kind of lower down the list.
Okay. Now, when you look at these risk factors, do you kind of look at them all and then also consider things that are going on in the person's life, whether they might be making statements that show hopelessness, things of that nature?
Yes.
Okay, so for example, you gave a lot of very strong weight, apparently, to some medical statements that were made by Ms. Clarkson, in the medical record that I showed you this morning, correct?
Yes.
Okay, in other words, very positive that she was a very energetic, really believed in herself as far as wanting to become an actress and become famous, things of that nature. Is that correct?
I don't know about those statements.
Okay. I know. I'm tired of the headache talk. Why? She was shot by somebody else. It was ruled a homicide. And the only other person there was Phil Spector. Why are we talking about her medications and her headaches? I don't understand. Okay, so we're going to end it there. I set it up to redirect. This is the first time I've ever done that, so I don't know if it's going to work. But we're going to give it a try. And we are going to watch the burned and battered murder trial. And I will tell you about it over there. So, see you then. Bye.